Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now, today on the show, we're going to be looking at how the aviation industry is preparing for the resumption of air travel. This as countries around the world are rolling out their mass vaccination programs. The International Air Transport Association, or IATA, is the trade association for airlines. Its 290 members currently comprise 82% of total air traffic. And Vinoop Goel is the Asia Pacific Regional Director for Airports and External Relations for IATA. He joins us on the show now. Vinoop, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Now,
thank you for having me.
If I may begin our conversation, I just want to get a sense of how IATA is thinking about the designing and the planning of protocols for the aviation sector. All of this, I'm sure, it's early days still, but I'm sure you're preparing for the reopening of borders and resumption of mass air travel.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. The big challenge we have today is that international air travel is closed in a number of countries or is highly restricted. In the Asia Pacific region, we have international air travel at about 5% of what it used to be pre-COVID. So, IATA is looking at a number of operational protocols to ensure that passengers and crew are safe and that aviation is not the vector for the transmission of the virus. One of the initiatives that we are working on is the IATA Travel Pass, and I'm happy to give you more details on that in this show.
Vinoop, can you help us understand if there's a distinction to be made between domestic travel and international travel? Because in larger countries, the airline sector might be actually quite significant in transporting people. So is there a distinction to be made, and where does IATA fit in terms of the domestic end of the dynamics?
Okay, so that's a very good question. For larger countries or for any country, the key issue today is governments are trying to deal with the health crisis at home. So they're trying their best to make sure that the population is safe. And for people that have contracted the virus, they're trying to cure them. While they're doing that, the governments understandably do not want additional cases to come into the country, and so have implemented a number of restrictions, which essentially have closed or almost closed borders. But what that means is domestic travel is allowed to prosper in many of these countries. So we have seen that in countries like China, Korea, and in the US, which have fairly large domestic markets where air travel is going on pretty much close to normal because it does not increase the risk of transmission. We have shown, studies have shown that, air travel can be safe and that the travel itself is not a vector for transmission. The issue comes when you're going from say a country which has a higher risk of transmission to another country which has a lower risk. So obviously the country with the lower risk would like to keep people out. And so we are looking at protocols in order to provide confidence to both the governments and passengers that it can be done in a safe manner.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really important word there. Confidence is really key, and let's talk a little bit about how we can build that confidence. I want to come back first on these protocols that IATA is thinking about designing. You mentioned the IATA Travel Pass. I understand it's a kind of a health verification app or a digital app. Which will capture travelers' health information, so vaccination history, COVID-19 test results, and the like, and this to ease cross-border safety checks. How do you envision this travel pass to work?
So, basically, as Melissa, as you mentioned, the IATA Travel Pass is a digital platform to facilitate the use of testing and vaccination certificates in a verifiable, safe, and most importantly, privacy protecting manner. It has 4 modules. the first module is a global registry of health requirements. This is very important because, as you may know, different countries have different kind of requirements in terms of, say, testing, what kind of testing is needed, and how many hours or days before departure. All that can be pretty daunting for passengers to keep track of. So IATA has this global registry of health requirements. The second module is a registry of all the places where a person can get authorized testing or vaccination. Again, one of the challenges we have today is that, okay, if you are aware that you need a test, where do you go? How do you have confidence that the test that I'm getting will be accepted by my destination country? So that's where we are keeping a registry of testing and vaccination centers. The third module is an application that these centers can use to issue a digital testing or vaccination certificate in a secure manner. And the fourth is the contactless travel app, which the passenger has, which would have a copy of the passenger's digital identity, say created from an e-passport, and also would have all the testing and vaccination certificates, which then the passenger can choose to share with airlines or the governments of the destination country. So very important in all this, and in order to give confidence to the passenger, is that this framework will ensure that the testing certificates meet the requirements of the destination country by design, and also that the passenger is in full control of the data. And for the airline and for the governments, they have confidence that anyone who is approved by this app to travel does have the right testing and vaccination certificates. So the problem that it addresses is, first of all, it is much more efficient than the paper process. It's much more secure than the paper certificates, which can be easily altered. This is a digital secure framework, and the labs that we have on our systems will all be authorized and would be approved by the government and the airlines to travel. So essentially, it gives confidence to both the passengers and the governments, and we hope it leads to a gradual opening of borders and a restart of air travel.
Vinoop, to what extent is the air transport industry looking to global health organizations like WHO to define the meaning of immunity? Because vaccination is one process, but immunity is a very tricky thing for a pandemic that's actually evolving. And we know that there are variants, and variants might be covered by a particular type of vaccine, but not others, or efficacy issues might arise as well. So in a kind of scenario of a kind of moving target, which is what the virus is, how do these systems keep up, and who do you look to maintain a kind of a science-based approach to this issue?
Sharaad, that is an excellent question. So, IATA is the Association for Airlines. We are an aviation organization. We are not the health experts. And you're right, WHO is the health expert. So we look to WHO and to the national health regulators for guidance. It is the national health authorities of different countries which determine who they want to let into and on what basis. What we advocate for is for a science-based and a data-driven approach. But we are also working with the WHO, for example, on ensuring there are global standards when it comes to vaccination certificates, because what we don't want is a mixture of different rules whereby one country, for example, is using vaccination A, but then the other country does not accept vaccination A and is only accepting vaccination B. So we are looking to WHO to set the global guidelines and provide the data, which allows for a global harmonized approach towards reopening of air travel.
Okay.
Is WHO doing that? Are you speaking to counterparts in WHO about this?
Yes, we are partnering with WHO. We are providing input from an aviation and an international travel perspective. And we do hope there are global standards especially for vaccination certificates. and for guidance to governments. Different governments, in the absence of guidance, have to look at their own processes, which can be cumbersome and will take time. So
can I ask you, just to clarify something? So with the IATA travel app, as you said, it's a digital kind of vaccination. You track your vaccination, your testing history. But I understand governments are also have their own kind of vaccine passport, so to speak. China just announced that it's rolling out its vaccine passport. I think the US, Germany looking to do the same. So what kind of future do you envision once borders are open? Do you envision vaccine passports being issued by individual countries, or do airlines have a role to play in it? IATA has a role to play in it. How do you envision that future?
Excellent question. So, the IATA Travel Pass is designed to work with testing certificates for now, but in the future with vaccine certificates. So, for example, if a country issues a vaccine certificate, what a passenger needs to know is whether this vaccine certificate allows me to enter another country, right? And different countries will have their own rules. We all should remember it's not IATA or airlines that set the rules for entry into a country. Those are set by national authorities. What the travel pass does is, we hope in the future it can take in all these vaccine certificates, and which is why a global standard is important. But then take the vaccine certificates, compare it with the entry rules of the destination country, and give the passenger and airline an indication whether this person is compliant and should be allowed to travel or not. So these different vaccine certificates can coexist and be part of the travel pass ecosystem.
Okay, Vinoop, we're going to take a quick break, but have you stay on the line because we've got so much more to cover in this conversation. Let's come back after these messages and continue our conversation with Vinoop Goel from IATA. Stay tuned to Consider This. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan, and we're speaking tonight to Vinoop Goel from the International Air Transport Association, better known as IATA. Vinoop, I want to zoom out and take a look at the aviation industry. You mentioned a little bit earlier that air travel is at 5% of what it was compared to pre-COVID times. What are you looking at in terms of a recovery, a timeline of recovery, particularly because I'm wondering how you see that landscape of aviation, whether it will be business travel that will drive the recovery of the aviation industry, or are you thinking more of leisure travel, personal leisure travel, holiday makers once borders reopen?
So thanks, Melisa, for that question. Just a bit of clarification. When I mentioned 5% of what it was, that is for international air travel in Asia Pacific. Okay. Domestic travel is at a much better level. And understandably, international air travel is more restricted because of border controls, and especially in Asia Pacific. Again, and allow me to digress a little bit, but the COVID situation in many of the Asia Pacific countries is far better than other parts of the world. But the governments in Asia Pacific have turned out to be a lot more conservative and a lot more careful about reopening borders and allowing for air travel. And that's where some of the protocols and technical solutions that IATA has developed, we are hopeful will lead to a faster reopening of air travel. So coming back to your question on what we see as recovery. Now our estimates have also changed and will continue to change as the virus situation changes. Vaccinations are probably going to lead to an increase in air travel as the people, the general populations become healthier, and governments are more acceptable towards getting inbound travelers because they feel their own health systems can cope up with any cases. One of the issues that governments face is, the health systems, hospitals have been working round the clock to cope up with their own domestic cases. And so they don't want additional cases to come from abroad. But as the virus subsides and vaccinations allow for, the hospitals to have spare capacity, that gives governments the confidence to open. Our estimate was that, and continues to be, that we will reach pre-COVID level traffic globally around 2024. That was an estimate we made a few months back. We are constantly reviewing these numbers. We are also hopeful, given where vaccinations are, that we will see leisure travel start to take off in the second half of this year. Business travel may be a little more delayed, but we think some of the leisure travel will start to take off because, families have been away from each other. People need to connect with their friends. There's only so much you can do over a Zoom call or a Teams call, and people need that connection, that human connection. So we think, yes, air travel will start to take off, international air travel, but again, this is a rapidly changing area and will depend on the overall health situation. The numbers are coming down, and that is a positive sign. But if there is another wave of infections, that will impact international air travel. So this is a situation that we're watching closely, and we will keep updating our forecast as need to be.
Vinoop, if I could ask you to do a kind of stock taking for us. I mean, this has been a terrible year for the industry, job losses and so on and so forth. Could you give us very quickly a sense of how much damage has been done to the industry? What real path to recovery are there for the remaining players, and who has essentially lost out and might never, and sectors that might never, as it were, come back to life as a consequence of an opening up?
Sharaad, that is a very important question. And I'm an optimist, and I would like to believe that things will go back to normal. And in fact, the industry will be stronger because one of the things that the airlines and people in the overall travel chain, hotels, tour operators, money changers, everyone has had to cut down on costs because of the lack of revenue. And so we are hoping this will be a leaner, meaner industry when it comes back. Again, if traffic recovers, the industry should be back in action, and not only just the airlines, airports, travel agents, and everyone in the the travel and tourism sector.
Right.
Jobs have been lost. Airlines and shareholders have lost value. That is that is a fact. As a result of that, there's been changes, fundamental changes in the way airlines have controlled the costs. So we hope these make the airlines and other people in the stakeholders in the sector much stronger. But I'm hopeful, we will be back in action within a few years.
Just to follow up on that, do you see a lot of consolidation in the aviation industry? I'm wondering, in this past year that the pandemic has hit the aviation industry, are we seeing, fewer airlines? Are we seeing smaller planes? Are we seeing low cost survive better than full service? If it takes all that financial wherewithal to survive this past year, and as you say, in the next coming years, till air travel recovers fully, can we see a change in the landscape of the aviation industry?
I do not have a crystal ball, but I think what we can say is you have seen some consolidation happening. Now, look, airlines and everyone else in many different industries are doing their best to survive. consolidation is one way of controlling costs and getting efficiencies. So we have seen some consolidations and some, mergers happening even in Asia Pacific. We'll probably see that in the near future. But as the industry recovers, this is a very exciting industry. And, speaking as one who has been involved with the industry for about 3 decades, we would see new players come in. You would see some people changing the business model from low cost to full service. But as over the last couple of decades, we have seen different operating models, be it low cost, boutique airlines, leisure airlines, business only airlines, large network airlines. They all can coexist in this ecosystem because there is, our long-term forecast for multiple growth in the industry in terms of passengers. We hope to see that again, and there will be a space for different players. So all I can say is watch this space.
Watch this space. We'll ask you to check back into your crystal ball in a couple of months. But I want to ask you about how quarantine impacts air travel. I think one of the, should borders open up, or even with essential travel, the idea of quarantine-free travel doesn't seem like it's anywhere in the near future. How does quarantine, the need to quarantine, particularly at hotels, for requirements for certain countries, how does that impact sentiment towards air travel?
Okay, so this is a very important question, and we have done many surveys in the public surveys, and we have talked to people in the industry, and essentially quarantine is as good as keeping your borders closed. A 14-day quarantine does not allow one to do business. It does not allow one to go on a holiday. You can't think of a holiday which requires the first 2 weeks to be stuck in a hotel room. So our focus is to open borders without quarantine. With quarantine, it's as good as keeping your borders closed. Now, there are studies still going on which say that a 14-day quarantine can possibly be reduced depending on the kind of testing you do and the origin of the passenger. So it's all about risk analysis. What is the risk of importation of a person coming from a country which probably does not have any cases in the community? So in that case, is quarantine needed? That is the question. Yeah. And so what we are trying to tell governments is, look at the health situation in your country, look at the vaccination situation in your country, then do a risk analysis and also see how does it compare to the other destination, and then come up with a testing regime, testing/vaccination regime, which eliminates or minimizes quarantine. And that is needed to restart the industry.
And one last question. In terms of Southeast Asia, what governments do you see as leading the pack, having the best practices in place and doing the prep right? And who are the laggards, if you can name a few and shame them?
All the governments are doing their best. The problem is that every government has to look at their own domestic situation and is trying to do the best to manage the domestic situation and see what can be done in terms of international air travel. So we have different models, right? In some countries, like for example, they completely close the border and only allow for essential travel. Some countries have travel bubbles, which you would have heard of. Others have what are green lanes. So there are different models across the world. Each government is trying their best, and we are working with governments across the region. And our expectation, and if I was to call on governments, is talk to each other, see if there is a option for a travel bubble to start small. Maybe they can look at opening up travel for limited business travel or for certain segments of the population where the risk is minimal or equivalent. For example, if you're going from country A to country B with similar risk levels, then how am I increasing the risk by traveling between these countries, right? So travel bubbles, maybe a Southeast Asia bubble, an ASEAN bubble can be looked at so that you have the common protocols between these countries and can allow people to travel between back and forth.
Right.
We are working with governments and we hope to see air travel start in Asia Pacific in the near future.
Vinoop, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for sharing IATA's perspective with us. Appreciate your time. That's all we have for you. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. But don't forget to get all your latest news and info on COVID-19 updates at astroawani.com and the Astro Awani app. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off the evening.
We will be back with you same time tomorrow. Good night.